"Do you trust me?" the millionaire asked tenderly, and she, so young and pure, gave herself completely to that love. But what happened next? Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, subscribe, and leave a like because this story will blow your mind. The black limousine stopped in front of the small cafe where Eliza had worked for 3 years. The aroma of freshly ground coffee permeated the air, mingling with the salty breeze coming from the Atlantic Ocean. It was just another day in Nantucket, that small historical island off the coast of Massachusetts, where weathered cedar-shingled cottages lined cobblestone streets that seemed to whisper stories from centuries past. Sometimes destiny arrives without warning, dressed as a stranger, and forces us to look beyond the horizon we believed was infinite. Eliza thought as she absent-mindedly wiped the same table for the 3rd time. When the door opened, the tinkling of the bell sounded different. Perhaps it was the way the man entered, with that quiet confidence of someone accustomed to having the world adapt to his presence. Or perhaps it was his eyes, grey like the sea in a storm, that seemed to search for something beyond a simple coffee. Nathaniel Morrison didn't belong in this place. His tailored suit, his discreet but obviously expensive watch, and that way of observing everything as if he were evaluating its worth, not in money, but in something deeper, betrayed him as an outsider. At 41, he carried the weight of his business empire with the same naturalness with which others wore a jacket. "Good morning," he said in a voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. "A double espresso, please." Eliza nodded, feeling an inexplicable tremor in her hands as she took the white porcelain cup. While preparing the coffee, she felt the man's gaze following her movements. It wasn't an invasive or inappropriate look, but contemplative, like someone watching the sea searching for answers. "Is it always this peaceful here?" he asked when she served him the coffee. "Except on weekends when tourists get off the ferry to photograph the historical houses," she replied, with that sincere smile everyone on the island knew her for. "But today is Tuesday. Tuesdays belong to the locals and the sea." The man smiled, a gesture that seemed to transform his sculpted face into something more accessible, more human. "I like that idea. Perhaps I need a Tuesday in my life too." What Eliza couldn't know as she returned behind the counter was that those words contained more truth than he himself was willing to admit. Nor could she imagine that this casual encounter would forever alter the course of her existence, like when the sea, after years of gently lapping at the shore, finally decides to change the profile of the entire coast. For an entire month, the routine repeated with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every morning at exactly 9:30, the black limousine would stop in front of the cafe. Nathaniel would enter, order his double espresso, sit by the window where he could contemplate the sea, and remain for exactly 45 minutes before leaving. The townspeople began to talk. Curious glances multiplied, and theories about who this mysterious outsider might be grew like foam on the shoreline. Some said he was a famous writer seeking inspiration. Others that he was a repentant businessman, escaping the pressure of big cities. Eliza, for her part, maintained the professional distance that had always characterized her interactions with customers. At 21, she was known in Nantucket for 3 things: her unwavering honesty, which prevented her from accepting even excessive tips; her natural kindness, which led her to care for the cafe's hydrangeas as if they were her daughters; and that charming naivety that seemed to protect her from the world's malice. On a rainy afternoon in March, when the north wind lashed furiously against the windows and raindrops rhythmically tapped the cafe's glass panes, something changed. "Have you ever thought about seeing the world beyond these waters?" Nathaniel's question emerged suddenly as she served him his second coffee. The question caught her off guard, nearly causing her to spill the hot beverage. "Pardon me. The world, there's so much more beyond Nantucket," he insisted, with a gaze that seemed to pierce through her. "Paris, Rome, Tokyo, places where the horizon doesn't end in water." Eliza felt a strange tightness in her chest, a mixture of longing and fear. "I've never left Massachusetts," she confessed, surprised by her own sincerity with a stranger. "My grandmother used to say, 'Why look for other landscapes when you have the most beautiful one in the world right outside your window?' Your grandmother never saw the sunrise over Manhattan's skyscrapers or the sunset from the top of the Eiffel Tower," he responded with a smile that contained a certain sadness. "There's beauty everywhere, you just need the courage to go look for it." That night, for the first time in her memory, Eliza couldn't sleep. Her small apartment, always so cozy with its flowery curtains and walls covered with photographs of the sea in different seasons, suddenly felt like a cage. She approached the window and gazed at the dark horizon where the sky and sea merged into a single black entity. What if there's something more for me than this place? She wondered, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The internal conflict had begun. The paralyzing fear of leaving everything she knew versus the burning desire to discover who she could be away from those cobblestone streets. "You can't be serious," Fiona's voice, her best friend since childhood, resonated with disbelief when Eliza told her about the dinner invitation Nathaniel had extended to her. "You barely know the man." They were sitting on the small pier, their feet dangling over the water that reflected a sky heavy with clouds. The smell of fish and salt permeated the air as fishing boats swayed gently with the tide. "It's just dinner, Fiona," Eliza responded, though even she didn't believe it was just that. "Besides, it's in Boston. I'll come back the next day." "Boston is 2 hours from here." Fiona looked at her with concern. "And he's not just anyone. I've done some research. Do you know who Nathaniel Morrison is?" Eliza shook her head. She had never felt curious enough to Google his name, as if she wanted to preserve the image she had formed of him through their conversations. "He's the owner of Morrison Shipping." "My God, Eliza. He controls half the commercial ports on the East Coast. His fortune is valued in the billions." The information hit Eliza like a bucket of cold water. Suddenly all the pieces fit together. The limousine, the tailored suits, that way of speaking about the world as if it were an accessible place. Why would someone like that come every day to have coffee in a small town like Nantucket? She murmured, more to herself than to her friend. "That's exactly the question you should be asking yourself." Fiona squeezed her hand affectionately. "Men like him don't do anything without a purpose." Despite the warnings, 3 days later, Eliza found herself on the ferry to Hyannis, then on a bus to Boston, watching as the coastal landscape was left behind, replaced by the suburbs that seemed endless. She wore her best dress, a simple but elegant navy blue one she had bought especially for the occasion, spending almost all her savings. Boston received her with its chaotic energy. Lights, noise, hurried crowds. The taxi driver took her to the restaurant where she was meeting Nathaniel, a place called L'Espalier that, as the driver explained with a certain reverence, was one of the most exclusive in the city. Upon arrival, the first significant obstacle for Eliza became evident. The restaurant was completely empty, except for one table in the center, illuminated by candles. "Good evening, miss," a formally dressed maitre d' greeted her. "Mr. Morrison is waiting for you." "Where is everyone?" she asked, confused. "Mr. Morrison has reserved the entire restaurant tonight, just for the two of you." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. That gesture, which should have seemed romantic, awakened an uncomfortable feeling in her. Was she just a passing whim for a man accustomed to buying everything he desired? Nathaniel rose when he saw her, dressed in a dark suit that seemed made to enhance the grey of his eyes. "So you look beautiful," he said, softly kissing her cheek. "You reserved the entire restaurant." It wasn't a question, but a statement loaded with a certain reproach. He looked at her for a moment, capturing her discomfort. "I thought you'd be more comfortable without curious stares," he explained. "But if you prefer, we can go somewhere else, a normal place with more people." That moment of vulnerability, that willingness to adapt to her wishes, disarmed Eliza's defenses. Perhaps he wasn't simply a rich man accustomed to imposing his will. "No, it's fine," she finally conceded. "But next time, I'd prefer something more simple." "Next time," he repeated with a smile that lit up his entire face. "I like how that sounds." During dinner, between haute cuisine dishes she had never tasted before and wines whose value probably exceeded her monthly salary, Nathaniel told her about his life, how he had built his empire from scratch, his travels, the places he had known. But also, for the first time, he revealed something personal. It had been 5 years since his wife had left him, leaving a void that all his money couldn't fill. "Sometimes I think success comes at too high a price," he confessed as dessert was being served. "Everything I achieved cost me something I can't recover. Time, innocence, the ability to trust." Eliza observed him attentively, seeing for the first time not the billionaire but the vulnerable man beneath the armor of power and money. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked. "We barely know each other." Nathaniel took her hand across the table, a gesture that sent an electric current through Eliza's body. "Because when I walk into that small cafe and see you tending to your hydrangeas, talking with the elderly residents, refusing excessive tips, I see something I thought no longer existed in this world, a purity of feeling that makes me want to be a better person." The return to Nantucket the following day was marked by a sense of unreality. As the ferry moved toward the island, Eliza felt she was heading to a place that was no longer entirely hers. Boston, with its lights and its immensity, with Nathaniel's presence, had planted a seed of change within her that was already beginning to germinate. April arrived with an explosion of colors to the shores of Nantucket. Daffodils blanketed the moors with shades of yellow, and the sea acquired that intense turquoise tone characteristic of spring. For Eliza, however, this familiar beauty now seemed different, as if she were seeing it through a new filter. Nathaniel's visits had become more frequent and intimate. They were no longer limited to the cafe. Now they walked on the beach, dined at small inns in the historical center, and sometimes simply sat in silence on the rocks, contemplating the horizon. It was during one of these walks that he gave her a flat box wrapped in silver paper. "A small gift," he said, with an expectant gleam in his eyes. Inside was a sky-blue silk dress, so delicate that Eliza was afraid to touch it, as if it might dissolve between her fingers. "It's beautiful," she murmured, mentally calculating that this small gift probably cost more than her entire year's salary. "I thought it would match your eyes," he explained, "and there's a charity event in Boston next weekend. I was wondering if you'd like to accompany me." The invitation hung in the air like both a promise and a warning. Accepting meant taking another step toward that unknown world he represented. A world of events, jewels, and sophisticated conversations for which she was not prepared. "Nathaniel, I don't belong in that environment," she confessed, carefully returning the dress to its box. "I wouldn't know how to behave, what to say." He took her face in his hands, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "You belong wherever you decide to belong, Eliza. The rest are just details that can be learned." That night, sitting in the small kitchen of her apartment, Eliza observed the dress spread out on her bed. The moonlight entering through the window made the silk shimmer as if it were alive. The contrast between that luxurious garment and her worn but clean sheets was a perfect metaphor for what was happening in her life. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. "Don't do it." Fiona's voice sounded worried. "The whole town is talking, Eliza. They say he's buying you with expensive gifts." "It's not like that," she defended herself, although a part of her wondered if her friend might be right. "He's not what they think." "Men like him always seek the same thing," Fiona insisted. "An exotic adventure with the small-town girl, something to break the monotony of their perfect lives. And when they get bored, I don't want to continue this conversation." Eliza cut her off, feeling a tightness in her chest. "I need to hang up." But her friend's words had planted a doubt. Was she really special to Nathaniel, or just one more in a long list of whims? The silk of the dress seemed to whisper warnings as she caressed it with trembling fingers. The price of dreams, she would soon discover, is not measured in dollars, but in the parts of oneself that one is willing to sacrifice to achieve them. The charity gala at the Museum of Fine Arts was exactly as Eliza had feared, a display of wealth and power where every gesture, every word, seemed to be coded in a language she did not understand. Under the imposing architecture of the classical building, among tables decorated with rare orchids and surrounded by priceless masterpieces, she felt like a fish out of water. The sky-blue dress moved like a wave around her legs as she tried to keep up with Nathaniel, who greeted businessmen, politicians, and celebrities with the naturalness of someone born to move in these circles. "Nathaniel, darling, aren't you going to introduce us to your companion?" The velvety but sharp voice of a woman in her 50s, adorned with jewels like a Christmas tree, stopped them. "Eliza, this is Vanessa Blackwood, president of the Art and Life Foundation," he said, placing a protective hand on Eliza's back. "Vanessa, this is Eliza Reed." "Enchanted," Eliza responded, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "And what do you do, dear?" Vanessa asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Model? Actress?" "I work in a cafe in Nantucket," she replied honestly, noticing how the woman's smile froze. "How quaint," Vanessa exclaimed, before turning to Nathaniel. Always so original, Nathaniel. I love how you support rural talent." The comment, loaded with barely disguised disdain, was like a slap. Eliza felt her cheeks burning as Vanessa walked away, laughing softly. "Don't mind them," Nathaniel murmured in her ear. "They're like snakes disguised as peacocks." But the damage was already done. Throughout the night, Eliza felt observed, judged. Every laugh, every glance seemed to be directed at her. The most difficult moment came during dinner when a joke made her laugh louder than was apparently acceptable in that environment. The momentary silence that followed her spontaneous laughter was so dense that she wished the floor would open and swallow her. Later, upon going to the restroom, she overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst fears. "She's the widower's new one," a female voice was saying, between the sound of running water and perfume bottles being opened. "A waitress or something, from some coastal town. Can you imagine the fish smell?" "She won't last," another voice responded. "She's just another of those naive girls he collects. 2 months, 3 at most. Then back to the little cafe she came from." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Eliza looked at herself in the mirror, seeing a stranger with eyes bright with unshed tears. The dress that had earlier seemed like a dream now felt like a costume that didn't belong to her. Upon leaving the bathroom, she found Nathaniel's concerned gaze. "Are you all right?" he asked, taking her hands. "You're pale." "I want to leave," she whispered. "Please get me out of here." Without asking questions, he guided her to the exit. In the limousine that took them back to the hotel, Eliza finally let the tears she had been holding back escape. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I can't do this. I'm not like them. I'll never be." Nathaniel embraced her, and for the first time since they had met, he kissed her. A soft, almost reverent kiss that tasted of expensive champagne and dangerous promises. "I don't want you to be like them," he said when they separated. "I fell in love with the girl who tends to hydrangeas and talks to elderly people, not with a copy of those empty women." The word love hung between them like a confession that changed all the rules. Eliza looked at him, searching in his grey eyes for some sign of deceit, but found only a vulnerability that mirrored her own. "Do you trust me?" he asked, holding her trembling hands. Eliza nodded, unable to speak, knowing she had just made a decision that would forever alter the course of her life. Yes, she trusted him, despite all the warnings, despite the abysmal differences between their worlds, despite the fear provoked by this new and unknown feeling growing in her chest. That night in the suite at the Four Seasons, amid Egyptian cotton sheets and under a ceiling with contemporary design, Eliza gave herself to a man for the first time, and as their bodies merged into one, she couldn't help but wonder if she was discovering heaven or falling into an abyss from which she could never escape. May brought with it a revelation that shook the foundations of the reality Eliza believed she knew. One afternoon, while driving around Boston's outskirts, Nathaniel took her to see his home in Beacon Hill, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. The word home turned out to be an understatement. What appeared before her eyes as they passed through the enormous wrought iron gates was a Georgian mansion surrounded by gardens that seemed pulled from a fairy tale. Marble fountains, ponds with water lilies, and paths bordered by perfectly trimmed hedges composed a landscape that seemed unreal in its perfection. "Welcome to Morrison Manor," said Nathaniel, watching her reaction with a mixture of pride and a certain insecurity. "It's overwhelming," was all Eliza could say, feeling infinitely small amidst such opulence. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive. Italian marble floors, coffered ceilings, artwork that was probably worth more than all of Nantucket combined. Each room seemed designed to impress rather than to be lived in. As they toured the place, Eliza noticed that despite all its beauty, the mansion lacked something essential: warmth. There were no personal photographs, no objects that seemed to have sentimental value. It was like a perfectly preserved museum, devoid of soul. "Bow, you live here alone?" she asked, her voice echoing in the grand hall. "With the staff," he responded. "Cooks, gardeners, cleaning personnel, and Harriet, the housekeeper. She's been with my family since I was a child." As if summoned by the mention of her name, an older woman with a severe aspect but kind eyes appeared in the doorway. "Tea is served in the conservatory, sir," she announced formally, though her eyes examined Eliza with evident curiosity. "Thank you, Harriet," Nathaniel responded. "This is Eliza." The woman made a gesture that could be interpreted as a bow. "Welcome to Morrison Manor, miss," she said, with an accent that revealed her Scottish origins. "I hope your stay will be pleasant." During tea, served in porcelain so fine that light passed through the cups, Nathaniel finally revealed to her the true magnitude of his empire. "Morrison Shipping isn't just a shipping company," he explained. "We control ports in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, commercial routes that feed millions of families. It's a responsibility that sometimes weighs too heavily." Eliza tried to process the information. She wasn't simply dating a rich man. She was getting involved with someone whose decisions affected the lives of countless people. "Why me?" The question escaped her lips before she could contain it. "Of all the women you could have, women from your world, with education, with connection, why choose a waitress from Nantucket?" Nathaniel set down his cup carefully, as if organizing his thoughts. "When my wife left me, something broke inside me," he began. "It wasn't just the abandonment, but the betrayal. She left me for my best friend, someone I completely trusted." He paused, his grey eyes clouded by the painful memory. "After that, I immersed myself in work, built a bigger, more powerful empire. I thought success would fill the void, but it only made it deeper." He stood and approached the conservatory's balustrade, from where the entire property extended to the high walls. "And then one day, I walked into that small cafe in Nantucket. I saw a young woman who refused excessive tips, who treated each customer as if they were special, who conversed with the elderly about the weather with genuine interest. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt something awaken inside me." He turned to her, with a vulnerability that contrasted deeply with all the power and wealth that surrounded him. "I didn't choose you despite who you are, Eliza. I chose you precisely for that, for your honesty, your kindness, your way of seeing the world without cynicism, qualities that are scarce in my environment." The words hung between them, loaded with a sincerity that would disarm Eliza's last defenses. However, before she could respond, a female voice cut the moment like a knife. "How touching, Father. You've always had a gift for emotional speeches." In the conservatory entrance, a young woman approximately Eliza's age observed them with eyes hard as flint. Her resemblance to Nathaniel was undeniable. The same grey eyes, the same strong jawline, though in her, everything was sharpened by evident hostility. "Imogen." Nathaniel visibly tensed. "I wasn't expecting you until next week." "Evidently," the newcomer responded coldly. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your guest?" "Of course," he replied, regaining his composure. "Eliza, this is my daughter Imogen." "Imogen, this is Eliza Reed." "The waitress from Nantucket," Imogen said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your reputation precedes you. All of Boston is talking about my father's new conquest." "Imogen, please." Nathaniel's voice acquired a warning tone. "What?" "I'm just being honest," she approached Eliza, examining her like someone evaluating merchandise. "Tell me, how long do you think this will last before my father gets bored and sends you back to your little town with a generous financial compensation?" The words were like a lash. Eliza stood up, feeling short of breath. "I think I should go," she said, struggling to maintain her dignity. "Eliza, no." Nathaniel tried to take her arm, but she moved away. "I need space, please." Her voice sounded strange even to herself. "This is too much." Without waiting for a response, she headed for the exit. As she crossed the impeccable marble hall, she could hear the argument exploding in the conservatory, the voices of father and daughter rising with mutual reproaches. Outside, the garden that had earlier seemed like a fairy tale now looked like a hostile labyrinth. She didn't know how to leave, or even exactly where she was. She sat on the edge of a fountain, seeing her distorted reflection in the water agitated by the wind. "What have I gotten myself into?" she thought, as the first tears began to fall, mixing with the fountain water like raindrops in the sea. The storm arrived without warning, transforming Boston's sky into a grey canvas torn by lightning. Eliza remained seated by the window of the hotel room where Nathaniel had installed her after the incident at Morrison Manor. She had been locked in there for 3 days, rejecting his calls, ignoring the bouquets of flowers that arrived every morning with notes of apology. The water beat furiously against the glass, perfectly reflecting the tempest she felt inside. Imogen's words continued to echo in her mind, mixing with the derogatory comments of the women at the event, with Fiona's warnings, with her own doubts. A particularly strong thunderclap startled her. At that moment, her phone vibrated with a message. "I'm downstairs in the lobby, please, 5 minutes, that's all I ask. Nathaniel." She was about to ignore it, as she had done with all the previous ones. But something in the simplicity of that message, devoid of the florid attempts at apology from the previous days, moved her. Perhaps he deserved at least an explanation. When she went down to the lobby, she found him soaked, as if he had walked in the rain without caring. His grey eyes reflected a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. "Thank you for coming down," he said simply. 5 minutes, she replied, crossing her arms. "I've been thinking a lot these days," he began, running a hand through his wet hair. "About us, about what happened with Imogen, about what I'm asking you to do." He paused, searching for the right words. "I'm asking you to change your entire life for me, to abandon your job, your town, your friends, to enter a world that can be cruel and merciless, and I haven't offered anything in return except feelings that I might not even be able to maintain." Eliza watched him, surprised by this display of self-criticism. "My daughter was right about one thing," he continued. "I have a history of relationships that don't prosper, women who come and go from my life without leaving a mark. And I understand why you might think you're just one more." Another thunderclap reverberated, making the hotel's windows vibrate. "But there's something different with you, Eliza," his voice broke slightly. "For the first time in my life, I'm terrified. Afraid of losing you, afraid that you'll see through all this facade of power and discover how empty I am inside. Afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize you deserve something better than a broken man." That confession, naked and sincere, hit something deep in Eliza's heart. These weren't the studied words of a man accustomed to getting what he wants, but the desperate cry of someone who fears losing the only authentic thing in his life. "Imogen doesn't accept me," she finally said, breaking her silence. "And probably never will." "It will take time," he admitted. "She suffered a lot. Her mother's departure affected us both in different ways. She built walls, I built an empire. Neither made us happy. The storm outside seemed to be subsiding, as if the sky wanted to give them a respite. I can't promise it will be easy," he continued. "There will be more Imogens, more uncomfortable events, more offensive comments, but I can promise one thing. Every day, every hour, I'll strive to deserve your trust. To be the man you see when you look at me, not what the rest of the world believes they know." He extended his hand to her, a gesture so simple yet so loaded with meaning. "Do you trust me?" he asked, the same words he had pronounced in the limousine after the event, but now carrying new weight. Eliza looked at that extended hand, aware that her answer would determine the course of her life. All her instincts for self-preservation screamed for her to run, to return to the safety of Nantucket, to her simple but predictable life. But her heart had made the decision long before her mind could process it. "I trust you," she said, placing her hand on his, feeling how their fingers intertwined. At that precise moment, as if responding to her decision, a ray of sunlight pierced through the stormy clouds, illuminating the lobby with a golden light that seemed to bless that improbable union. What Eliza couldn't know as they merged in an embrace was that this decision, made under the influence of a passing storm, would trigger much greater storms in her future, but also moments of light so intense they would make any darkness worthwhile. September transformed Boston with a golden light that softened the city's contours. For Eliza, the last few months had been a whirlwind of changes. She had left her job at the cafe in Nantucket, moved to an apartment in Boston that Nathaniel had insisted on buying for her, a compromise they reached after she flatly refused to move into Morrison Manor, and was trying to adapt to a life that sometimes felt like a borrowed suit, too big for her. That September morning, as they had breakfast on the apartment's terrace overlooking Boston Common, Nathaniel seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone. "Is something wrong?" she asked, pouring him more coffee. He looked up as if surprised that she had noticed his unease. "It's just work," he replied, though his eyes avoided hers. Nothing important, but Eliza had learned to read his expressions, to detect those little ticks that revealed when something deeply troubled him. "Nathaniel," she insisted, taking his hand on the table, "trust me. Whatever it is, we can face it together." He sighed deeply, putting the phone on the table. "A reporter from the Boston Globe is investigating us," he finally confessed. "Charlotte Evans. She's known for her investigative reports on business elites. Apparently someone has tipped her off about our relationship. And that's bad? Eliza asked, confused. So it's not like we're doing anything illegal. Nathaniel's laugh sounded bitter. In my world, Eliza, reporters don't look for love stories. They seek scandals, corruption, abuses of power. Evans is trying to construct a narrative about the billionaire predator and his innocent victim. The words fell like stones in Eliza's stomach. That's absurd, she protested. Nobody forced me to do anything. I'm with you because I want to be. I know, he replied, squeezing her hand. But headlines sell more when there are villains and victims, not when there are two people who simply love each other despite their differences. The weight of what it meant to be the partner of someone like Nathaniel Morrison was becoming more real. It wasn't just facing high society or hostile relatives. It was living under constant scrutiny, where every gesture could be misinterpreted, every word taken out of context. What can we do? She asked, feeling a tightness in her chest. My lawyers are handling the situation, he explained. But I wanted to warn you. They might try to contact you, ask you questions. They might even follow you. The idea of being pursued, photographed, turned into an object of public speculation made Eliza feel a chill. I won't let them harm you, he added, seeing her expression. I promise. But promises, Eliza would soon discover, are sometimes difficult to keep, even for the most powerful men. A week later, while buying flowers at a market nearby, she noticed a man with a camera photographing her from a distance. The next day, her phone began receiving calls from unknown numbers. And finally, one morning, she found an elegant woman waiting for her at the building's entrance. Eliza Reed, said the woman, extending a card to her. Charlotte Evans, from the Boston Globe. I'd like to talk to you about your relationship with Nathaniel Morrison. Eliza looked at the card, feeling her heart accelerate. I have nothing to say, she replied, trying to walk around her to enter the building. Are you sure? The reporter insisted. I have information about other women before you, young women like you from humble backgrounds who were discarded when they ceased to be interesting. Eliza stopped, feeling the ground move beneath her feet. Other women. Had she just been the latest in a long list of whims? I don't believe anything you're saying, she managed to articulate, although her voice trembled slightly. You don't have to believe me, Charlotte responded with a compassionate smile that was almost insulting. You should just ask yourself if you really know him. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who seem the most charming. That night when Nathaniel arrived at the apartment, he found Eliza sitting in the dark, her gaze lost in the city lights. What happened? He asked, turning on a lamp. She approached me today, she replied without looking at him. The reporter, Charlotte Evans. Nathaniel visibly tensed. What did she say? She told me about other women, Eliza replied, finally turning to look at him. She said there were others before me, young women from humble backgrounds, according to her words, women you discarded when you got bored. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Nathaniel slowly removed his jacket, as if buying time to organize his thoughts. There were other relationships, yes, he finally admitted. I'm not going to lie about that. But it wasn't how she describes it. Then how was it? Eliza's voice sounded strangely calm, almost distant. Nathaniel sat across from her, his grey eyes loaded with an intensity that almost hurt to look at. After my divorce, I tried to fill the void, he explained. I dated several women, some younger, some my age. Some relationships lasted weeks, others months, but I never promised anything I couldn't fulfill. I never deceived anyone about my intentions. He paused, passing a hand over his tired face. What we have, Eliza, is different. With you I found something I thought no longer existed for me, something real. Eliza wanted to believe him. With all her heart she wanted to trust that what they shared was special, unique. But doubts, once planted, grew like weeds, threatening to suffocate what they had built. How can I know I'm not just one more, she asked, her voice finally breaking. How can I be sure that in a few months you won't tire of me and look for someone new? The vulnerability in her question seemed to disarm him completely. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I can't give you proof of the future, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. I can only promise that every day I'll fight to deserve your love, that I'll try to be a better man than I've been. That with you, for the first time, I'm thinking of an us that lasts beyond the present moment. The tears Eliza had been holding back finally overflowed, tracing bright paths down her cheeks. I'm afraid, she confessed, exposing her soul. Afraid of loving you so much that I lose who I am in the process. Because that was the true fear that tormented her. Not that he would abandon her, but that she herself would disappear, diluted in his world, transformed into a shadow of the woman she had been in Nantucket. I won't let that happen, he promised, drying her tears with gentle fingers. Because I fell in love with Eliza Reed, the girl from Nantucket who refused excessive tips and tended to hydrangeas. If that woman disappeared, what I feel for you would disappear too. That night, embraced in the darkness, Eliza made a decision. She wouldn't allow suspicions to poison what they had. She would trust him, but also herself. She would keep the Eliza from Nantucket alive, even amid the whirlwind that was life with Nathaniel Morrison. What she didn't know then is that her greatest test was just beginning, and that the true battle wouldn't be against intrusive reporters or malicious rumors, but against something much more dangerous, the possibility of losing her own way. October arrived with unexpected news that shook the foundations of what Eliza and Nathaniel had built. One morning, while they were having breakfast, his phone rang insistently. The call lasted just a few minutes, but when he hung up, his face had lost all color. "What's happened?" she asked, alarmed by his expression. "The IRS," he replied in a hollow voice. "They've opened an investigation into Morrison Shipping for alleged tax fraud and bribes to port officials." Eliza felt the ground open beneath her feet. "But that's not true, is it?" she asked, desperately searching his eyes for some reassuring sign. Nathaniel stood up, approaching the window, his silhouette outlined against the autumn light streaming in abundantly. "Of course not," he finally responded. "I've made mistakes in my life, Eliza, but I've never crossed that line. My company operates with total transparency." "Then why—" "Someone wants to destroy me," he interrupted her, his voice acquiring a sharp tone she had rarely heard. "And I think I know who." The following days were a whirlwind. Meetings with lawyers, endless phone calls, journalists camping outside the building. News of the investigation leaked quickly to the press, and soon headlines were speculating about the possible fall of the Morrison empire. For Eliza, the hardest part wasn't the media harassment or the uncertainty, but seeing how Nathaniel transformed before her eyes. The tender and vulnerable man she had learned to love was being replaced by someone hard, obsessed, who spent entire days locked in meetings and sleepless nights reviewing documents. One night, after nearly 48 hours without sleep, she found him in the office, surrounded by papers, his gaze lost on the computer screen. "You need to rest," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He pushed her away with a brusque gesture that surprised her. "I can't rest while they're trying to destroy everything I've built," he responded harshly. "Nathaniel, please," she insisted. "You're exhausted. You can't think clearly like this. And what do you know about this?" he exploded, turning with bloodshot eyes. What could a waitress from Nantucket know about running a business empire or facing a tax investigation? The words hit Eliza like a physical punch. She stepped back, hurt beyond what she could express. "You're right," she said with a trembling voice. "I know nothing about that. I only know that the man I fell in love with wouldn't speak to me like this." She left the office before the tears threatening to fall could do so. She locked herself in the bedroom, feeling that the entire world they had built together was beginning to crumble. An hour later, Nathaniel entered the room. He had showered and changed clothes. His eyes reflected a remorse so deep it almost hurt to look at him. "I'm sorry," he said simply, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I have no excuse for speaking to you like that. I'm terrified, Eliza. Not for myself, but for everyone who depends on Morrison Shipping. Thousands of families whose livelihood is at stake if the company falls." Eliza approached him, taking his hands in hers. "I understand," she said softly. "But you can't face this alone. You don't need to do that." "It's my battle," he replied. "And I am your partner," she retorted firmly. "If we're together in the good moments, we're also together in the difficult ones." That night, while he finally slept, exhausted from days of tension, Eliza made a decision. She might not know anything about corporate taxes or fiscal investigations, but she knew who could help them. And although the price would be high, she was willing to pay it. The next morning, she did something she never thought she would do. She called Morrison Manor and asked to speak with Imogen. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of Boston. When Eliza arrived, Imogen was already there, as elegant as always, with that air of superiority that seemed as natural to her as breathing. "I must admit I was surprised by your call," Imogen said without preambles. "To what do I owe the honor?" "Your father," Eliza replied directly. "He's in trouble and needs help." "And you think I can help him?" Imogen's smile was cold. "Or you simply think I should do it?" "I know you study law," Eliza continued, ignoring her tone, "and I know that despite everything you love him. He's your father." "My father has made many mistakes in his life," Imogen replied, stirring her coffee without tasting it. "You're just the most recent one." Eliza took a deep breath, containing the defensive response that struggled to emerge. "I'm not here to discuss our relationship," she said calmly. "I'm here because the company that will someday be yours is in danger, and because beyond what you think of me, I know you don't want to see your father destroyed." Something in Imogen's expression changed, as if for the first time she really saw her. "Why do you care so much?" she asked with genuine curiosity. "You could simply leave, return to your town, to your simple life. No one would blame you for abandoning a sinking ship." "Because I love him," Eliza replied with simplicity. "And because when you love someone, you don't abandon them in their worst moment." A silence extended between them. Finally, Imogen let out a sigh. "I know someone," she said at last. "A professor at the university, a specialist in tax law. He's worked as a consultant for the IRS. If anyone can find a way out, it's him." "Thank you," said Eliza, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I'm not doing this for you," Imogen clarified, although her tone had lost some of its acidity. "I'm doing it for him." "I know," Eliza replied, "and that's enough." As she stood to leave, Imogen stopped her with a question. "Does he know you came to see me?" Eliza shook her head. "No, and I'd prefer he didn't find out." A shadow of respect, perhaps the first, appeared in Imogen's eyes. "Perhaps I've judged you hastily," she admitted, "but that doesn't mean I approve of this relationship." "I don't need your approval," Eliza responded with a confidence that surprised them both. "I just need your help to save him." That afternoon, when she returned to the apartment, she found Nathaniel talking with an older woman. Harriet, the housekeeper from Morrison Manor, was sitting across from him on the sofa, her calloused hands holding a cup of tea. "Eliza," Nathaniel greeted her, a spark of hope in his dull eyes. "Harriet has brought interesting news." The older woman looked at her with astute eyes that seemed to evaluate every detail of her being. "I've served the Morrison family for over 40 years, she said with a marked Scottish accent, "and there are things only those who work in the shadows come to know." "Harriet believes she knows who might be behind the investigation," Nathaniel explained. "I don't just believe it, I know it," the woman affirmed with certainty, "and it's someone very close to this family." The road to recovery would be long and difficult, but for the first time in weeks, Eliza saw a glimmer of hope in Nathaniel's eyes. And although the storm was far from over, at least now they weren't facing it alone. Winter arrived in Boston with unusual severity, covering the city with a mantle of cold that seemed to reflect the mood in Eliza's apartment. November had passed in a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, statements before IRS officials, and sleepless nights reviewing documents she barely understood. The investigation continued its course, relentless, while the media delighted in every new leaked detail. "The Morrison empire wobbles," proclaimed the headlines with barely disguised enthusiasm, as if there were a certain collective pleasure in seeing the powerful fall. That December morning, Eliza observed the city from the window, the buildings enveloped in a cold mist that seemed suspended between the skyscrapers. For almost 2 weeks, she hadn't stepped outside without being harassed by photographers or reporters. She felt like a prisoner, not just in that luxurious apartment, but in a life she increasingly recognized less as her own. The sound of keys in the door pulled her from her thoughts. Nathaniel entered, his face marked by the constant fatigue and tension that had accompanied him since the investigation began. "How did it go?" she asked, although she could read the answer in his expression. "The same," he replied, dropping his briefcase on the sofa. "More questions, more documents requested, more barely veiled insinuations." He approached her, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that contrasted with the hardness his face had acquired in recent months. "But there's something new," he added, a glimmer of hope momentarily illuminating his grey eyes. The lawyer Imogen recommended found something, an irregularity in the procedure that could give us time. Eliza felt momentary relief, though she avoided mentioning that it had been she who approached Imogen. That small secret had joined so many others unsaid that were beginning to accumulate between them like a fine layer of dust, imperceptible to the naked eye, but increasingly present. "That's good, isn't it?" she asked, striving to sound optimistic. "It's something," he replied, rubbing his eyes wearily. "But we're still far from clearing this up. Someone orchestrated this investigation meticulously, and I need to discover who and why." Eliza hesitated a moment before speaking. "Have you considered what Harriet said?" she asked cautiously. "About your ex-partner, Julian?" Nathaniel shook his head. "Julian and I had our differences, but going so far as to sink the company—" "No, it must be someone else." The sound of the doorbell interrupted the conversation. Both tensed instantly. Unannounced visits had become a cause for alarm. Nathaniel approached the intercom. "Yes?" he asked brusquely. "It's Harriet," replied the familiar voice of the housekeeper. "I need to speak with you, sir. It's urgent." Minutes later, the older woman was seated in the living room, her usually stoic face showing uncharacteristic agitation. "I found something," she said without preamble, removing a yellow envelope from her handbag. "I was cleaning at Morrison Manor, in Mrs. Vivian's old office." The name of Nathaniel's ex-wife fell in the room like a stone in a calm pond, creating waves of tension. "What does Vivian have to do with this?" Nathaniel asked, his voice tense. Harriet extended the envelope to him. "I think you should see for yourself, sir." With fingers that suddenly seemed clumsy, Nathaniel opened the envelope. Inside were several documents and what appeared to be a handwritten letter. As he read, his face went from confusion to shock, and finally to a mixture of pain and fury that completely transformed his features. "What is it?" Eliza asked, alarmed by his reaction. Nathaniel passed her the documents without a word. They were financial reports from Morrison Shipping, some originals and others clearly altered. And the letter, written in elegant female handwriting, was addressed to someone identified only as J. "My dearest J," it began, "I attach the documents you requested. I have followed your instructions to the letter, modifying the dates and amounts as agreed. When all this explodes, Nathaniel will be too busy saving what remains of his precious empire to worry about us. We can finally be together, as it always should have been. With all my love, Vivian." Eliza looked up, meeting Nathaniel's eyes, now darkened by a storm of emotions. "Vivian and Julian," he murmured. "All this time, it was them." Harriet nodded gravely. "Mrs. Vivian and Mr. Julian maintained a relationship for years," she confirmed, "even before she left you. I suspected but never had proof until now. And now they're trying to sink me." Nathaniel's voice sounded strangely calm, a calm that was more terrifying than any outburst of anger. "They falsified documents to make it look like I committed tax fraud." "But this clarifies everything, doesn't it?" Eliza intervened, feeling a ray of hope. "We can take these documents to the authorities, prove it was all a conspiracy." Nathaniel slowly shook his head. "It's not so simple. These documents prove that Vivian falsified information, but not necessarily that I'm innocent. Besides, we'd have to explain how we obtained them, which could implicate Harriet." "I don't mind being implicated, sir," said the housekeeper firmly. "I've served this family with loyalty for decades. I won't allow that woman to destroy everything you've built." That night, after Harriet had left, Eliza found Nathaniel on the terrace, looking at the city lights with a distant expression. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping him with a blanket to protect him from the cold. "About everything I've lost," he replied without looking at her. "My marriage, my trust, possibly my company, and all because of loving the wrong people." Eliza felt something break inside her. "Do you regret it?" she asked, fearing the answer. "Us." Finally, he turned to her, his eyes bright in the darkness. "Never us," he said, with an intensity that made her shiver. "You're the only real and true thing in this entire nightmare, Eliza. Without you, I would have completely sunk by now." He embraced her tightly, like a castaway clinging to his last lifeline. "We'll get through this," she promised, although she didn't know how. Together. What Eliza didn't know as they embraced under Boston's starry sky was that fate had one last test in store for them, One that would challenge not just their love, but the very essence of who they were and what they were willing to sacrifice for each other. Spring arrived in Boston with an explosion of colors that dramatically contrasted with the gray months that had preceded it. Cherry blossoms painted the city's streets in pink and white, and the air filled with renewed promises. For Eliza, the changes weren't just external. At her recently turned 22 years, her body was experiencing the most profound and mysterious transformation. A new life was growing inside her, a secret she had been keeping for almost 3 months. She still hadn't found the right moment to tell Nathaniel. The tax investigation, though progressing slowly, remained a sword of Damocles over their heads. The documents found by Harriet had been handed over to the lawyers, who were seeking the best way to use them without compromising the loyal housekeeper. That April morning, as she contemplated her reflection in the bathroom mirror, Eliza passed a hand over her belly, still flat, but soon to reveal her secret. The mix of emotions was overwhelming. Joy, fear, uncertainty, hope. "What kind of world am I bringing you into, little one?" she thought, concerned about the uncertain future that awaited them. The sound of the front door opening startled her. Nathaniel had left early to meet with his lawyers, and she wasn't expecting him until the afternoon. "Eliza!" His voice sounded strange, charged with an emotion she couldn't identify. She left the bathroom to find him standing in the middle of the living room with an indecipherable expression on his face. "What's happened?" she asked, alarmed. "Did something happen?" A slow smile, the first authentic one in months, began to form on his face. "It's over," he said simply. "What's over?" Eliza held her breath, fearing to misunderstand. "The investigation. It's been closed. The lawyers found a way to use Vivian's documents without compromising Harriet. And the specialist Imogen recommended demonstrated irregularities in the procedure. The news took a few seconds to fully penetrate Eliza's consciousness. "Are you sure?" she stammered, not daring to believe it. Nathaniel nodded, and suddenly he looked 10 years younger, as if the weight he had carried for months had disappeared at once. "Completely sure. There's still work to do, rebuilding trust, dealing with the press, but the legal nightmare is over." Eliza felt her legs weaken. Nathaniel took her in his arms, spinning her around the living room, laughing like a child. "I can't believe it," she murmured against his chest. "After everything we've been through." "We won, Eliza," he said, taking her face in his hands. "And it was thanks to you. Your strength, your faith in me when everything seemed lost, kept me afloat. The moment was perfect." If there was a right time to share the news she had been keeping, it was this. "Nathaniel, there's something I need to tell you," she began, feeling her heart beat rapidly. But before she could continue, the doorbell rang, once again interrupting a crucial moment. It was Imogen, as elegant and impeccable as always, although something in her expression had changed. The usual hardness had given way to something more complex, almost vulnerable. "I suppose you've already heard," she said, addressing her father as she entered the apartment. "I just told Eliza," Nathaniel replied, his joy too great to be contained even in the usually intimidating presence of his daughter. Imogen nodded, and then did something completely unexpected. She extended her hand to Eliza. "I owe you an apology," she said, with a formality that barely concealed the sincerity behind her words. "I judged you unfairly, and I was wrong." Eliza took her hand, too surprised to speak. "My father told me it was you who sought me out," Imogen continued, "that you risked his anger to come to me for help. That made me see you in a different light." "I only did what anyone would do for someone they love," Eliza responded simply. A shadow of a smile, perhaps the first genuine one Eliza had seen from her, appeared on Imogen's face. "No, it's not what anyone would do. It's what exceptional people do, and I think my father is lucky to have you." The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken emotions, years of pain and resentment beginning, very slowly, to heal. "There's something else," Imogen added, finally breaking the silence. "Something perhaps you should know." She extracted a photograph from her purse and handed it to Nathaniel. It was an ultrasound. "I'm pregnant," she announced, with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. 4 months along, you're going to be a grandfather." Nathaniel looked at the image and then at his daughter with an expression of total astonishment. "Imogen, that's wonderful," he finally managed to say. "But how?" I mean, I didn't know you had a partner. An unusual blush colored Imogen's cheeks. It's complicated, she admitted. The father is a colleague from law school. We're not together, and he doesn't know about the pregnancy. I haven't decided yet whether to tell him. She paused, and her next confession left Eliza completely stunned. I understand why Mother left you, she said to her father. I'll never forgive her for it, but I understand. She was never happy in our world, with its rules and appearances. And when she fell in love with Julian, she saw a way out. What I can't forgive is that she tried to destroy you. Imogen, you don't have to... Nathaniel began, but she interrupted him. Yes, I need to say this. I've been so angry with you for years, blaming you for her departure, for not being the father I wanted. But now, facing motherhood alone, I understand how difficult it must have been for you. The tears, so uncharacteristic in that Iron Lady, began to gleam in her eyes. And seeing how you fought these months, how you've protected your employees even at the cost of your own peace, I've realized that perhaps I judged you too harshly. The embrace between father and daughter, awkward at first, then increasingly secure, sealed a reconciliation that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. Eliza observed the scene with silent tears rolling down her cheeks, aware she was witnessing a moment of profound healing. When they finally separated, Nathaniel wore an expression of serenity that Eliza had never seen in him. I think it's time for all of us to start anew, he said, looking first at his daughter and then at Eliza. Without secrets, without resentments. It was the perfect moment. Eliza took a deep breath and stepped forward. In that case, she said with a trembling smile, I think I also have an announcement to make. The expressions of surprise, followed by pure joy that appeared on the faces of Nathaniel and Imogen when she revealed her pregnancy, would remain etched in her memory forever. Nathaniel seemed unable to finish the sentence, overwhelmed by emotion. Almost 3 months, Eliza confirmed. I wanted to wait until the situation with the investigation was resolved before telling you. Imogen was the first to recover from the surprise. It seems our children will be almost the same age, she commented with an ironic smile. Cousins who will grow up together. The word together hung in the air, loaded with promises. For the first time since she had met Nathaniel, Eliza felt she truly belonged to that family, not as an intruder or an anomaly, but as an integral and accepted part. That night, when they were finally alone, Nathaniel knelt before her, placing a hand on her still flat belly. Thank you, he said simply, his voice hoarse with emotion, for this gift, for not abandoning me when everything seemed lost, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. I love you, she responded, because in the end everything came down to that. Despite the differences, the opposite worlds they came from, the obstacles they had faced, and those surely still awaiting them, what they felt for each other was real and true. And as spring bloomed in Boston, 2 new lives began to form, promises of a future where the painful past could finally remain where it belonged, behind. The Boston summer stretched relentlessly over the city, turning the streets into asphalt ovens, and forcing its inhabitants to seek refuge in air-conditioned interiors or under the scarce shade of the parks. For Eliza, in her 5th month of pregnancy, the heat was especially oppressive. Her body, which was beginning to clearly show the signs of the new life it harbored, seemed to generate its own tropical climate. I think we need to get out of here, she commented one afternoon, while uselessly fanning herself in front of the apartment window. Nathaniel, who was working on his laptop, looked up with concern. Are you feeling unwell? Should I call the doctor? Eliza smiled at his constant worry. Since she had announced her pregnancy, Nathaniel had become the embodiment of paternal concern, investigating each symptom, each stage of development, as if he were preparing the most important report of his career. I'm fine, she reassured him. I just miss the sea, the salt air, the breeze that comes from the Atlantic. Nantucket. The name of her hometown hung between them like an evocation of a time and place that seemed incredibly distant, though barely more than a year had passed since her departure. Nathaniel observed her in silence for a moment, as if making an important decision. Do you want us to go? He finally asked. To Nantucket. Are you serious? Eliza felt her heart accelerate at the possibility. Completely serious, he replied. In fact, I think it's an excellent idea. We could spend the rest of the summer there, escape Boston's heat, and you could reconnect with your roots. The happiness Eliza felt at this prospect was so intense, it almost hurt. Since leaving Nantucket to follow Nathaniel, she had barely returned twice, brief and tense visits, marked by the curious glances of the locals and barely veiled comments about the cafe girl who caught a billionaire. "Are you sure?" she asked, suddenly doubtful. "It wouldn't be like Morrison Manor. The houses in Nantucket are small, simple." Nathaniel approached her, taking her hands in his. "Eliza," he said softly, "I don't care where we are as long as we're together. Besides, after everything you've done to adapt to my world, it's fair that I do the same for you." A week later, a simple Audi, Nathaniel had agreed to leave the limousine in Boston after Eliza's insistence that it would attract too much attention, stopped in front of a small blue-painted house in the upper part of Nantucket. "It's perfect," Eliza murmured, contemplating the modest residence with its small front garden full of hydrangeas and its unparalleled view of the sea. "I bought it 3 months ago," Nathaniel confessed, watching her reaction with a certain anxiety. "I wanted it to be a surprise for when the baby was born, but given the circumstances—" Eliza looked at him astonished. "You bought it? For me?" "For us," he corrected. "I thought you'd like to have a place here to visit for our son to know your roots. A place where he could grow up knowing where his mother comes from." The tears, so frequent during her pregnancy, immediately came to Eliza's eyes. They weren't just hormones. It was the deep emotion of recognizing that Nathaniel truly understood her, that he comprehended how important it was for her to maintain that connection to her origins. "It's the best gift you could give me," she said, embracing him tightly. The days in Nantucket passed with a simplicity that dramatically contrasted with their life in Boston. They woke to the sound of seagulls and the distant murmur of the sea. They had breakfast with fresh bagels that Eliza bought at the town bakery. They walked along the small harbor where fishermen returned at dawn with their day's catch. To Eliza's surprise, Nathaniel seemed to adapt perfectly to that slower pace. He worked a few hours each morning, managing his business remotely, but dedicated the entire afternoons to her. Together they explored the beaches, visited nearby towns, or simply sat in the small garden, contemplating how the sun slowly sank into the marine horizon. "I've never seen you like this," she commented one evening as they shared a simple dinner on the terrace. "Like what?" he asked, distracted by the beauty of the sunset. "So relaxed, so at peace." Nathaniel reflected for a moment before responding. "I think I never have been," he finally admitted. "My entire life has been a constant race. Build more, achieve more, protect more. I never allowed myself to simply be." The reunion with the town wasn't as simple as Eliza had imagined. In the first weeks, she noticed curious glances, heard whispers when she entered shops. For most, she remained the girl who left with the billionaire, a kind of modern fairy tale that fed conversations at the local bar. Fiona was the first to break the ice. One morning, while Eliza was buying fish at the market, her old friend approached with a mixture of shyness and determination. "You're different," she said, observing Eliza's evident pregnancy. "A lot has happened," she replied, unsure how to proceed. "I know." Fiona seemed uncomfortable. "I read the newspapers, you know. I saw about the investigation, the problems. I called you several times." "I changed my number," Eliza explained. "There were too many reporters harassing us." An awkward silence settled between them, years of friendship apparently diluted by distance and circumstances. "I missed you," Fiona finally confessed, her voice breaking slightly. "And I felt terrible about all the things I said about him." Eliza felt something untie inside her, a tension she didn't know she had been carrying. "I missed you too," she responded, and before she could add anything more, they found themselves embracing in the middle of the market, laughing and crying at the same time, under the astonished gaze of the fishmongers. From that moment, things began to change. Fiona's presence acted as a catalyst, a bridge between Eliza and the town she had left behind. Little by little, curious glances transformed into friendly greetings. Whispers became direct questions about the baby, about when the wedding would be, about what it was really like to live with the billionaire, a term Nathaniel accepted with a resigned smile. One afternoon, while walking along the harbor, they encountered Mrs. Caldwell, the elderly owner of the cafe where Eliza had worked. "So it's true," said the woman, observing Nathaniel with sharp eyes that belied her advanced age. "The man who stole my best waitress." "Guilty, I'm afraid," he responded with a respectful smile. The old woman studied him a moment longer, as if evaluating his worth. "The cafe hasn't been the same without you," she finally said, turning to Eliza. "The hydrangeas died. No one cared for them like you did." "I'm sorry," Eliza murmured, feeling a pang of guilt. "Don't be sorry," the old woman replied, her voice softening. "Everyone must follow their own path. I just hope he knows how lucky he is." "I do know, ma'am," Nathaniel responded with a seriousness that surprised both women. "Believe me, I know." That night, as they contemplated the stars from their small garden, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, the sensation of being completely at home. Not just in the physical sense of the place, but in a deeper and more fundamental sense. As if the different parts of her identity, which had been in conflict for so long, finally began to reconcile. "What are you thinking about?" Nathaniel asked, noticing her contemplative silence. "That maybe we don't have to choose," she replied. "Maybe we can have both worlds, Boston and Nantucket, your life and mine. Perhaps it's not about abandoning one identity for another, but creating something new from both." Nathaniel nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. "A place where our son can be both a Morrison and a Reed," he added. "Where he can learn about both international business and the art of distinguishing a good catch." The baby, as if wanting to express his approval, gave a kick that Eliza felt clearly. She took Nathaniel's hand and placed it on her belly, just in time to feel another movement. "I think he agrees," she laughed. Under the starry sky of the Massachusetts coast, with the distant sound of the sea as a soundtrack, two people from completely different worlds finally found common ground. A space not defined by money or origin, but by something much more fundamental: love and the promise of a shared future. Fall arrived in Boston with a spectacle of colors that transformed Boston Common into a canvas of ochres and golds. After spending the summer in Nantucket, Eliza and Nathaniel had returned to the city for the last months of the pregnancy, seeking proximity to the private hospital, where she would give birth in a few weeks. The transformation they had experienced during those months was evident to everyone. Eliza, now in her 8th month, radiated a serenity and confidence that notably contrasted with the insecure young woman who had first arrived in Boston. Nathaniel, for his part, had left behind the obsession with control that characterized his life before meeting her, finding a balance that many of his business colleagues observed with amazement. That October morning, while they had breakfast on the apartment's terrace, the doorbell rang insistently. "Are we expecting anyone?" Eliza asked, puzzled. Nathaniel shook his head, heading to the door with a certain caution. The months of media harassment during the investigation had left a mark difficult to erase. The surprise on his face when he returned to the terrace, accompanied by Harriet, was evident. The housekeeper, always formal and composed, seemed unusually agitated. "Harriet," Eliza greeted, genuinely happy to see the woman who had done so much for them. "What a pleasant surprise." "I'm sorry for showing up without warning, Miss Eliza," the older woman replied, her hands twisting in a nervous gesture uncharacteristic of her. "But there's something you need to know, something I can no longer keep hiding." Nathaniel and Eliza exchanged concerned glances. "Please, sit down," Nathaniel offered. "Would you like a coffee? Something to eat?" Harriet firmly shook her head, sitting but staying on the edge of the chair as if prepared to flee at any moment. "What I'm going to tell you is difficult," she began, "and it might change the way you see me. But with the baby about to be born, I think it's time you know the whole truth." She paused, breathing deeply before continuing. "I knew Vivienne before she married you, sir," she finally revealed. "In fact, I knew her very well. I am her biological mother." The declaration fell like a bomb between them. Nathaniel remained motionless, as if trying to process information too complex. "Her mother?" he finally managed to articulate. "But Vivienne was adopted. Her parents were British diplomats who adopted her in Australia." "That's the official story," Harriet confirmed. "The truth is that I was very young, barely 18, when I became pregnant by a married man. In those days, in a small Scottish village, it was an unbearable shame. They sent me to Australia, to distant relatives, to have the child in secret. The Wilsons, a diplomatic couple without children, offered to adopt her. The tears she had been holding back began to roll down her wrinkled cheeks. I was just a country girl, without education, without resources. What could I offer her? With the Wilsons, she would have opportunities, education, a life I could never give her. Eliza moved, approached to take the older woman's hand. But then, how did you end up working for the Morrison family? She asked softly. When Vivian married Mr. Nathaniel, I saw my opportunity, Harriet explained. I got a job as part of the cleaning staff. I just wanted to see her, be close to her, even as a servant. I never intended to reveal who I was. She turned to Nathaniel, whose eyes reflected a mixture of shock and disbelief. That's why I've always been so loyal to you, sir, even when she left you, because I saw how you treated her, with a love and respect she never knew how to value. And because, in a way, you and Miss Imogen became the family I never had. Nathaniel passed a hand over his face, trying to assimilate all that information. Did Vivian know who you were? He finally asked. Harriet nodded slowly. I confessed to her 6 years ago, shortly before she left you. I thought that as an adult she had the right to know the truth. It was a terrible mistake. Why? Eliza asked, sensing they were reaching the core of the revelation. Because she used it against me, Harriet's voice broke. She threatened to report me for abandonment if I didn't help her, destroy Mr. Nathaniel. What? Nathaniel stood up, unable to contain his agitation. What are you saying? She was already planning to leave you for Julian, Harriet confessed. But she didn't want to just leave. She wanted revenge. She felt you had turned her into a trophy, that you had taken her away from her dreams. And I, out of fear of losing the little contact I had with my daughter, agreed to help her with the false documents. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with contradictory emotions. But then why did you help us during the investigation? Eliza finally asked. Why did you give us the evidence that incriminated her? Harriet's eyes, reddened by tears, reflected an iron determination. Because I realized I had made an unforgivable mistake, she responded. Because I saw the damage it was causing, not just to you, sir, but to thousands of families who depended on the company. And because, for the first time in my life, I decided to do what was right, even if it meant forever losing the possibility of reconciling with my daughter. She stood up, as if the weight of the confession was too much to remain seated. I'll understand if you want me to leave, she said, straightening her shoulders with dignity despite the tears. If you want to report me as an accomplice, I'll accept it. Nathaniel and Eliza exchanged a long look, one of those silent communications they had perfected throughout their relationship. We're not going to report you, Harriet, Nathaniel finally said, approaching the older woman. What you did in the end, risking yourself to help us, more than compensates for any past mistake. And we don't want you to leave, Eliza added, joining them. We need you. The baby will need a grandmother to tell him stories and teach him to make that lemon pudding only you know how to prepare. Grandmother? Harriet's voice was barely a whisper. Perhaps not by blood, Eliza replied, taking her wrinkled hand between hers. But family isn't always defined by blood, is it? It's defined by love, by loyalty, by being present in difficult moments. Harriet's tears now flowed freely, but they were of a different kind. Tears of relief, of gratitude, perhaps even of hope. I don't deserve so much kindness, she murmured. We all deserve a second chance, Nathaniel responded, surprising himself with the firmness of his conviction. We all deserve the opportunity to redeem ourselves. I myself have learned that in recent years, thanks to Eliza. Later, when Harriet had left, promising to return the next day to help with preparations for the baby's room, Eliza found Nathaniel on the terrace, contemplating Boston's horizon with a thoughtful expression. Are you all right? She asked, leaning on the railing beside him. I was thinking about Vivian, he replied honestly. About how resentment can consume a person until it makes them unrecognizable. Eliza nodded, understanding perfectly what he meant. I was also thinking, he continued, how fortunate I am to have found you, that you've chosen to stay by my side despite everything. It wasn't just luck, she replied, intertwining her fingers with his. It was a decision. Yours, to risk loving again after being hurt. Mine, to trust you when everything seemed to indicate I shouldn't. Sometimes love isn't just a feeling that hits you, but a choice you make every day. As the sun began to set over Boston, tinting the sky with reddish and purplish tones. Two people who had come to find each other despite coming from completely different worlds contemplated the future they were about to share. A future that, just a year ago, neither could have imagined. And in Eliza's womb, the new life they had created together moved gently, as if it too sensed the promise of that tomorrow that was about to begin. The first snow of December fell softly over Boston, turning the city into a fairy tale landscape. From the window of the hospital room, Eliza contemplated the snowflakes dancing in the air, forming an immaculate blanket over Boston Commons trees. The baby's soft cry drew her from her reverie. She turned to the small crib beside her bed, where her son of just 2 days slept restlessly. With movements still awkward from the fatigue of childbirth, she approached to take him in her arms, marveling once again at the diminutive perfection of his features, the button-like nose, the heart-shaped lips, the long eyelashes that brushed his rosy cheeks. "Everett," she whispered, caressing the newborn's velvety cheek. "My little Everett." The name had been a joint decision, a tribute to the enduring nature they both admired, symbolizing strength and resilience. Everett Morrison Reed, a perfect fusion of their two worlds, so different and now inseparably intertwined. The door to the room opened silently, revealing Nathaniel with a huge bouquet of white roses. His eyes, which had always been intense, now shone with a new light since the birth of his son. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked quietly, approaching to deposit a soft kiss on Eliza's forehead and another, even more delicate, on the tiny head covered with fine dark hair. "Tired but happy," she replied with a smile. "It's starting to snow. The first snow Everett sees." "The first of many," he said, placing the flowers in a vase by the window. "He'll have snow in Boston and sea in Nantucket. The best of both worlds." He sat on the edge of the bed, observing his son with an expression of adoration that hadn't disappeared since the moment of birth. "I have something for you," he said, taking a small blue velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Nathaniel, you've already given me too much," Eliza softly protested. "The house in Nantucket, the apartment renovation for the baby's room." "This is different," he interrupted, opening the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "It was my grandmother's. It's not as ostentatious as the diamonds I could buy you, but it has history. It has soul." He took Eliza's free hand, the one not holding Everett. "A year ago, I asked if you trusted me," he continued, his voice slightly trembling with emotion. "Today I ask you something more. Will you share your life with me officially, completely? Will you marry me, Eliza Reed?" Tears immediately came to Eliza's eyes, an emotional response that had become so frequent since the pregnancy that it almost made her laugh. "Yes," she replied simply, because no more words were needed. Everything they had lived through together, each test overcome, each moment of joy shared, had been a step toward this moment. Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger, a simple gesture that sealed a much deeper promise than any contract he had signed in his business life. "It will be a simple wedding," she anticipated, already knowing his preferences. "In Nantucket, by the sea, with close friends, your daughter, Harriet." "Whatever you want," he replied, leaning in to kiss her. "Big or small, luxurious or simple, I don't care. I just want it to be ours, authentic." At that moment, as if wanting to participate in the celebration, Everett opened his tiny eyes, of a grey identical to his father's, and looked directly at his parents with an expression that seemed much wiser than would correspond to his scant days of life. "Look, he has your eyes," Eliza whispered, moved. "And your determination," he responded, noticing how his son's small hand closed tightly around his finger. "He'll be unstoppable." A soft knock on the door announced the arrival of visitors. Imogen entered, carrying in her arms her own baby, a boy of almost 2 months named Oliver. Behind her, Harriet pushed a cart with a homemade cake and a steaming teapot. "We thought we could celebrate the birth with an improvised tea," Imogen explained, approaching to contemplate her new nephew. "He's beautiful, Eliza. He has Dad's eyes. And his aunt's strong temperament, I fear," Nathaniel joked, observing how the two women who had meant the most in his adult life, and who had once been so distanced, now shared a genuine complicity. Harriet, discreetly efficient as always, arranged cups and plates on the side table. Her eyes, upon resting on Everett, reflected an unconditional love. "It's like a miracle," the older woman murmured. "Seeing everyone together like a family." That's exactly what we are, Eliza affirmed, exchanging a knowing look with Nathaniel. A family, built from improbable encounters, from second chances, from hard-earned trust. The conversation flowed warm and natural among them, while outside the snow continued to fall, covering Boston with a mantle of purity that seemed to symbolize the new beginning they were all experiencing. Later, when the visitors had left and Everett slept peacefully in his crib, Eliza and Nathaniel remained embraced in the hospital bed, contemplating the future that opened before them. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I would be here, with you, with our son, I probably would have thought they were crazy, he commented, gently caressing Eliza's hair. Destiny has strange ways of working, she replied, recalling that first encounter at the cafe when the black limousine stopped in front of the place and that grey-eyed man entered, changing her life forever. Sometimes, the most improbable people turn out to be exactly the ones we need. Do you know what really won me over about you? He asked with a nostalgic smile. It wasn't just your beauty, nor your honesty. It was your ability to see beyond appearances, to find the man behind the billionaire. You made me feel like a person, not like an empire. Eliza raised herself slightly to look into his eyes. And you gave me the courage to seek beyond the limits I had imposed on myself, she responded. To discover that I could be more than I believed, without losing who I really was. In the crib, Everett made a small sound, a sigh of satisfaction that seemed the perfect seal for that moment of shared intimacy. I think he will be our greatest joint achievement, Nathaniel said, looking with adoration at his son. More important than any company or business. He'll be perfectly imperfect, Eliza predicted with a smile. He'll have the best and most complex of both of us. Your ambition and my stubbornness, your intelligence and my intuition, your world and mine. And above all, he added, completing the thought, he'll have love, a love that has overcome seemingly impossible tests, prejudices, abysmal differences, a love that has proved to be stronger than any obstacle. As the night advanced and snow continued to fall over Boston, in that hospital room, a new family celebrated the most valuable gift life can offer, the possibility of loving and being loved, of building together a future that transcends circumstances and origins. And Eliza, contemplating her sleeping son and the man who had transformed her existence, understood a fundamental truth. The true home is not a physical place, nor even a social condition. Home is that intangible but indestructible space that is created when two people decide each day to choose each other despite everything. You trusted me, Nathaniel had said at that crucial moment in their relationship. And that trust, cultivated day by day, facing each challenge together, had blossomed into something much deeper and more lasting than either could have imagined when their paths crossed in that small cafe in Nantucket, under the watchful gaze of the Atlantic Ocean and destiny.